In this interview episode, you'll meet Brenton Harrison, a financial professional who specifically serves first and second gen high-income earners and the host of the New Money, New Problems podcast. Time freedom and time flexibility, travel, and family are among his top priorities. Although 5 years ago, you wouldn't have known that because of how much he was either at work or glued to his laptop. In this episode, you'll learn how he's shifted his work hours and the way he works in those hours to be more in alignment with his ideal lifestyle. Brenton has several great tips and all the quotes to help us as business owners draw a line between prospecting and marketing, set boundaries around how much access people have to our time, our phone numbers, and our emails, and he's got a fabulous set of instructions to help you overcome imposter syndrome. Well, Brenton, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the show is called Reaching Abundance. And so I want to hear your perspective of what happened or what event occurred in your life that initially turned you on to the concept of abundance?
Yeah, I feel like it's very cliche at this point to say that the pandemic was a big moment for our family, but the pandemic was a really big moment for our family. Besides the obvious of being in the house and with your family every day in really close quarters, we actually, for some reason, decided to move 6 or 7 months into the pandemic, and we were building a home. And that process during the pandemic, because of not just the pandemic, but also lumber and all of that, was delayed by 3 months. So for 3 months, we had to move in with my parents, and they live in a community that is much more walkable than where we live. We were right, smack in the middle of the city, and just a slower style of living than what we were used to. And every day I had the ability to kind of get up and take a walk with my wife or throw my son in a stroller and go on a walk and really live a life that was so different than what I was doing before we were forced to slow down. And it really wasn't the financial idea of abundance. It was the freedom element of being able to structure your life in a way where you can choose and pursue things that you enjoy and not waiting till 60, 65 to do it. That really shifted my perspective on there having to be a different way to work than what I was doing before I had to stop working.
So talk to me about what you were doing before that you didn't realize was, this crazy busy hustle that we were all doing, but describe that for you.
So I came into financial services in 2009. So fresh off of one of the biggest recessions that we'd had in decades. So not an ideal time to enter into financial services, but I loved it. But to build a business when nobody trusted financial advisors, nobody trusted bankers, I was having to really, really work hard to see as many people as possible. And I was using the methods of marketing myself that financial advisors use. That was the only experience that I had, was learning from other financial advisors. So that method was cold calling. And when I first started, I had to do the 200 calls a week, and I had to do the Hot 100, where you write out the people who go to your church and who grew up with you and go through that 100 list of prospects. And it really grew from there, asking people for referrals and going to every networking event that I could possibly go to, joining every single board that I could possibly join, volunteering for everything. And that was the only way that I knew how to do it, because it was all I saw. And by the time the pandemic hit, I'm now 11 years into working that way. And the fortunate part of it was I had built a decent income, a decent business, a decent referral base. I no longer had to cold call, any of those things, and hadn't had to for a number of years. But you still had to put in hours the same way to quote unquote market yourself. So in my mind, I was marketing myself. I now know that I was not at all. I was prospecting. And it wasn't until I started to observe people outside of financial services that I even realized the difference between the two.
Okay. So for someone who's just any business owner, maybe in financial services or not, what's the difference between prospecting and marketing? Like, take us there. What's that mean?
The most simple analogy that I use that I did not create came to me from one of my business mentors, Marcus Henderson. And he says, prospecting is putting yourself in a position to catch a fish. You go buy a fishing rod, you get the bait, you get in a boat, you get out on the water, and you're trying to find the best spot where you can cast a line and have a fish bite on that hook. So that is the joining the boards, the going to the networking events, the calling people. You're positioning yourself to pursue. Marketing is doing things that make the fish want to chase the boat. So yes. I'm putting something out in the water where when I leave, or even if I'm not in the water, there's something that I left that's making them want to come back to my boat.
So then would you say your time home from the pandemic and that whole shift where you had to slow down and you were forced to take a step back, really, is what most of us did. At that point, did you kind of cue into, oh, I've been prospecting, I need to market?
I started looking around and realizing two things. The first is there are other industries where they don't do it this way, right? Like I have friends who are in marketing. My wife is in marketing, and the way that she looked at me building my business as compared to what she did for her clients and her employers was so markedly different. So it's like I have the understanding of the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to be that way without the knowledge of how to make it not that way. But the other part of it was looking at, so by the time the pandemic hit, my son was like 2 and some change. And we were 6 months to 9 months away from making school decisions and really having this realization that if I don't figure out a way to make it change, I'm not going to be able to go to the basketball games, to help with homework, to do all of those type of things, because those are like prime prospecting hours. So it was necessity, and also just feeling like there just has to be a different way, because there's no way that financial services is just this one field where it's impossible to figure out a way to market yourself without burning yourself out.
Right. So talk to me about like the hours that you were putting in prior to the pandemic and really that freedom shift, and walk us through, because I know you don't just like cut your hours and then like your life is great, right? So walk me through that transition. Of course, the pandemic's in there and that was a whole thing for all of us, but how did you initially start to change the way you worked and the hours that you worked? How did you approach that?
So I would say that I would typically get to the office around 9. I would probably be doing something client related, even if I wasn't sitting down in front of one. I'm taking calls, I'm returning texts and stuff like that until 7. So that's a 10-hour day. And then after dinner, you fire up the laptop and you're sending off emails that you hadn't gotten to because you'd been in meetings all day. And you're doing that while you're watching TV. So you're processing it as like not that big of a deal. But then you're doing that till 11:30. So you're like, okay, so that's, maybe you're not doing hardcore work for 12 hours, but you're kind of on the clock for 12 hours. And then there's the expectation for a financial advisor that you meet with the clients when the clients are free. So if someone wanted to meet at 8:00, or if someone wanted to meet on a Sunday, you feel like you can't turn down the business. So you're doing everything you can to like make it easier for them to work with you. That was life before the pandemic for 11 years.
Have you ever pictured yourself having your own show? Maybe it's time. This show is edited and produced by podcastabundance.com, And if you like what we're doing, we can do it for your business too. I'm Virginia Elder, and I've been helping entrepreneurs start podcasts to market their business since 2019. I coach you through branding, structuring your episodes, workflow, and recording your podcast. Then my team and I professionally edit your audio and video so that you don't have to. We'll even write your episode descriptions and titles so that when potential customers turn to Google, your show appears in their search results. Establish authority in your niche, expand your reach, and create a library of helpful content for potential and current clients, all with your own podcast. I'm here to hold your hand and make podcasting the exciting, up-leveling experience it should be, skirting you past the tech and software struggles too. Take the first step by booking a call with me using the link in the show notes or by visiting podcastabundance.com. Now, on to the rest of the show.
Yeah. And not to mention during the, after dinner hours until you decide to go to bed, your spouse is probably just sitting there watching the same show you are, but you're not really present because you're in the laptop, plugging away. And so, and then of course you weren't there before dinner. Like there's all these nuances within that are unsaid that are truly taking away from that presence and freedom component that, it's turning out that we all crave. So
Absolutely.
Talk to me about the shift. Like, how did you change that? What did you do initially? Was there something that worked or didn't work as far as time blocking, or how did you make the shift?
My sister is a pediatric physical therapist, and she also does a lot of DEI work for equity and inclusion in the healthcare space. And she came with me to a conference you're familiar with, FinCon, when they were in DC. And I invited her, and it doesn't have much of a connection to pediatric physical therapy. But she said something. She said, you sometimes get a lot more value stepping out of your industry and seeing how other industries do it, because you can just become so insulated with the way that your industry works. And that stuck in my mind. That was like 2018. And it stuck in my mind for like 2 years. I was going to say, that was a while ago. Yeah. But it there's sometimes that people say things and you're just like, that's interesting. So it wasn't relevant until I was looking for another way. And I started paying attention to course creators. And I paid attention to them because these are people who have a product or a service that in many cases doesn't change. They might add, like an addendum to the course, or they might do a 2.0, but the premise of the service is still the same. But they have to market themselves in a way where they're continuously driving people to a product that doesn't change. And I knew course creators who just didn't work that much, or, the way that they worked was completely up to them. It wasn't dictated on other people's time. We do 2 webinars a week. They are at these times. It does not matter what time you want it. Like if you want the course, you will be at that webinar at this time or this time. We're doing a live launch. It is at this date. There is no option for an alternative date. You will be here at this date or you will not. So I looked at them because they had figured out a way in my mind to shape the business around the way they chose to live their life without feeling like they had to kowtow to their customers' schedules, which is how financial advisors do it. And when I was on that journey, I came across a guy named Thomas Stovall, and Thomas had helped multiple course creators scale their annual revenues to 7 figures or more. And he just so happened to have gone to Tennessee State, and I'm based in Nashville. If you live in Nashville, it's a very, very small professional community. So I found him. I decided I wanted to reach out to him. And I think I sent text to 3 friends who went to Tennessee State around the time that he went there. And 2 of the 3 said, oh, yeah, I know him. Here's his number. And I reached out to him.
Wow. So talk about, for one, reaching out to a mentor of someone who was very involved with where you wanted to go. And then talk about the 7 levels of separation. That is huge. Clearly that worked for you in this case. And I think so often we are intimidated by those bigger figures, right? To say, oh, well, they helped these businesses do this, but I don't know if he's going to help me. I don't know. And then to just think to text some friends hey, do y'all know him? That's so smart. So tell us your thought process there. And, hopefully people listening can be encouraged to go ahead and take that step as well.
This is a bit of a longer answer, but there are actually 3 elements to it that I feel make me much more inclined than the average person to reach out to someone that is a hard person to reach or is a famous person or whatever the case may be. I went to college, Oakwood College, that is a 7-day Adventist school, and it is well known for its music. And there are several famous gospel artists who have gone to that school who also at some point in time came to Nashville to record and lived there for a while. And as a result, went to my church. So I grew up around people who had a really big profile, but to me, they were, Alvin or Cedric or this person that just goes to my church and is infinitely accessible and kind and don't have to feel like I have to put on airs to reach out to them. So from a very young age, I did not have that oh, here's this person over there. They're so big that you shouldn't approach them. That's very random, but truly just kind of growing up around people where you go in spaces and you see other people kind of fawning over them and you realizing this is a very humble person who is very approachable and you don't have to feel like you can't was helpful. That's number 1.
Yeah. They're just normal people too.
Yeah, they're normal people too. The second thing that kind of guides me is, again, quotes stick with me. And I don't know who said it to me, but at some point somebody told me, if you don't ask, the answer's already no. So in my mind, that is one of my guiding principles if I need a favor. If I don't ask, I try to make sure it's appropriate when I ask. But if I need something and I don't ask, well, then my answer's already no, so I might as well ask. And the worst that can happen is I had the answer I had before. So that's
same spot where I started.
Right where I started. So that's the second. But the third is I have a friend. His name is Frank Miles. He's a realtor here. And Frank, whenever he travels somewhere, he finds a person, typically a famous person that he admires in that city, and he sends them an email asking if they would want to grab a cup of coffee. And a lot of times he has to do some digging for the email address, or he has to take a stab and kind of hope that it's the right email address, first name at website.com or whatever the case may be. Gets a lot of bounce backs, gets a lot of, hey, this is not a good time, or no responses. But his philosophy is, will anybody ever respond? Probably not. But if they do, then I get to go to coffee with somebody that I have admired for years and years and years. So I did that with Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell is one of my favorite authors. And I was going to New York to visit my cousin, and I sent him an email, and he responded. His assistant forwarded me a response from her, but she blacked out his email and just said, just letting you know that Malcolm saw this, not going to be able to meet you for coffee, but he appreciated you reaching out. And to me, I'm like, I just sent a random email to Malcolm Gladwell and he saw it. And I'm sure he gets a ton of emails a day, but he probably gets less than you think of people who are willing to step out on a limb and say, can I take you for a cup of coffee? So those 3 things have really stripped any fear that I would have of, if I have a person's contact information, reaching out and seeing if we can connect.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really, really helpful, because I think so many business owners initially, sure, you build your business word of mouth, then you get into prospecting, then you get into marketing. And often, even though you are this successful individual and you have all of these things that you can, provide as proof, like, I'm doing well, you're still going to have that thing where you're like, oh, but they are so-and-so, they're up on this pedestal. And so even just to see them out somewhere, right? Just let's say you do circulate the same type of events and you see one of them, it takes a little bit of guts sometimes to walk up and introduce yourself and say hi as if you're peers, even though you are, but you just view them as on this pedestal for some reason.
Yeah, that imposter syndrome, it can be hard to overcome. You also have to remember that when I started, I had to call 200 people a week. So I was on the receiving end of many rude, do not ever call me agains. So to me, that builds up your muscle as well. So now, if I met Michael Jordan tomorrow and had 2 minutes to talk to him, I would ask him to be on the podcast. Why not? I will likely never meet him again. So if he says no, what's the difference?
Yeah, shoot your shot. What's holding you back? What's the point? Yeah, that's awesome. So let's circle back to the abundance concept. How has kind of these bold moves created additional abundance in your life that you may not have expected?
I am now infinitely more confident in standing on the value that we provide, the price that we charge for that value, and how we deliver it. There are some things that are non-negotiable because I've seen the freedom that it gives me, and I don't want to give that freedom back. So it makes me so much more confident to say, no, I will not meet with you on a Sunday. No, I will not meet with you at 8 p.m. These are my working hours. You would not tell your physician, hey, can you see me at my house at 8 p.m. or on Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock? They have working hours. So that's what it's done for me. It's given me the freedom and the abundance to be more convicted in the way that I got the abundance in the first place.
Absolutely. I love that. So talk to me a little bit about your schedule now, because we heard about your schedule pre-pandemic. Talk to me about how you use your time in an abundant way now is essentially what you're doing.
On Mondays, I do content creation. So I film podcasts, I edit. Our director of operations, we meet to go over what we're going to post for the week and how we can repurpose content and the like. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, I meet with clients. Fridays, I do administrative work. And if there's a client who just couldn't meet Tuesday through Thursday, but can meet during business hours, maybe I slide them in on a Monday or a Friday. But there has not been much pushback to just setting boundaries. Clients don't mind boundaries. It's just we're afraid to set them. So now my days are much shorter. I still work a lot, but I work on terms that are my own. And it's just a much more fulfilling way to work because I can know for sure. For example, our son, he does speech therapy, and his speech therapist, who he loves, we more so do it for like the tutoring element of it. When we started, he needed it. But now the person who we use actually lives on our street and our son loves her. Oh, so we've just kept doing the sessions, and she was unable to meet with him for a few months. And a spot opened up on her schedule again. And she said, hey, the only time that I have is 9 o'clock on Monday mornings. Well, I would have never been able to make that work pre-pandemic. But now, with no question, I can say that's actually perfect. I can restructure my week because I'm in charge of how I structure my week. My clients are not.
Yeah. And I think, we don't have to have a pandemic to kind of come to this realization. But for so many of us, that was the forced perspective because we had to time out and we had to step away and look back at what we had been doing and try to decide, like, am I happy? Do I like what I'm doing? And for a lot of people, no.
I think that humans have an unreal ability to make themselves comfortable in terrible situations for fear of change. There are other things. I told you I'm a big quote person, but I don't mind having uncomfortable conversations. That's never been a fear of mine, but I feel like for most people, they're very conflict averse. And, I will say, like, people will walk halfway around the world to avoid the awkward conversation right in front of them, right? Like, I'd rather do all this work to avoid just saying something that causes a little bit of tension in the room. And I think the same is true when it comes to how we work, to how we eat, to how we live, to how we sleep, to how we engage with the people who are around us. It's like, if we could change this and life would be so much better, but we are so afraid of that change that we would just rather make ourselves comfortable in the mess. And I think things like the pandemic didn't give us that option. And if you can find a way to do it without being forced, it would save you a lot of time, money, and stress.
Absolutely. Well, and I think so many people will say, oh, I'll fix my schedule when something, when I hit a certain revenue or when my kids go to middle school or when some arbitrary thing, right? In the future, I will help XYZ. I'll donate to this organization when whatever it is. We have these aspirations that if we wrote all those down and looked at that list, and if we were able to put them into action now or sooner rather than later, we would feel so good about the way we were living our lives and the things that we stood for. But we naturally put those off to this future arbitrary accomplishment that when I do that, then I can do this. Mm-hmm. So do you have some other ideas or ways that we can step into the idea of living abundantly now rather than later, and maybe how some of the people around us could even help with that?
It's not that I'm a vision board person, but I am a person who believes in putting some thought to how you want to live your life and being transparent about whether you're on the path towards it or away from it. So the first question that I would ask is, what does your ideal life look like? And that doesn't have to be financial. It could be freedom of time, freedom of schedule, whatever the case may be. And understanding that there is truly a way now to at least start building towards it. So for me, it was time with family, it was travel, it was flexibility of schedule. And if you don't see that example in front of you, you're just looking in the wrong place. It's out there. There's just too many people doing it to say that your ideal life isn't out there. And if that ideal life isn't in your field or industry of choice, it can be amended so that it fits your field or industry of choice. So start writing out those ideas, start figuring out how you would implement them in your world, and start, most importantly. Don't have this idea that it will somehow be easier 5 years in the future. It will be harder. If you stay in a job that you hate, but you do it well, eventually you'll get promoted and you'll start making more money in that job that you hate. And it will be even harder to change the way that you live your life now. The best time to do it is now.
Thank you. That really does help. So talk to me about, on this abundance track and time freedom, I know you have a podcast in addition to running your own advisory business. So How do you do it all?
I actually have 2 podcasts.
There you go.
So we made it a little more difficult on ourselves. The way that we do it is we use the podcast to generate all of the content that we use in our marketing plan. And we structure how we produce the podcast in a way where it is repeatable and scalable without requiring more time. So I had to ask myself, what is the goal of the podcast? And if the goal was to be a podcaster, then the way that we do it wouldn't necessarily work. But our goal for our podcasts is to get clients. And that allows us to structure it in a way where we're speaking to our target audience on stuff that's valuable to them. We're doing it in bite-sized bits of content, and we're repurposing it on the platforms where they consume without feeling like we have to do 8 different forms of it. It's like, well, you can take this one piece of content and repurpose it 8 different ways. So now all we have to do is that first bit of it, and it takes care of everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So I think that's the piece that a lot of business owners are stuck trying to figure out when they're looking at their schedule saying, I'm booked out already. I have no time. This is completely not aligned with why I started this business. And now I need some type of marketing for my business. So how could I possibly add that to my plate? So I think that's definitely a shift. I loved how you talked about really nailing down your goals with the podcast. So let's just assume anybody listening is, of course, a business owner, well into their journey, thinking about starting a podcast, or maybe they're early on into it. How did you get started? Like, give us kind of the quick run from before until now.
I made it sound professional. So I went to services like Fiverr and Upwork to get theme music and professional voiceovers and my leads and my commercials. And all of that probably cost me $150. I got equipment that sounded professional enough. So decent microphone, a mixer, all that type of stuff, or interface. That probably cost me another $250, but these are one-time expenses to get up off the ground. I batch recorded the first 10 episodes so that before I had my schedule, I didn't feel like I was going to put out some terrible piece of content because I was in a rush to get it posted by that Friday. Now I'm not as worried about that because I know how to do it. So if I need to, film an episode on Wednesday and have it posted Friday, I'm fairly confident. But to start, you need that muscle to be built up of how do you record? What does a good episode sound like? When do you need to scrap an episode and try over? And once I had all of those elements, I then said, how am I going to use this to draw people into my product or service? So again, with my goal being to bring in clients, it dictates some of the elements of the podcast. I don't let other people do commercials on our podcast. The podcast commercials are for our product and services. I don't just talk about random things that are relevant to somebody that's not my client. All of our topics are catered to our audience. So everything that we do is designed to not only speak to them, but it's also to give you top of mind preference. Because one of the things that I've realized is there's a whole lot of people who have been drawn to our brand since we started the podcast who do not listen to the podcast, but they just happen to see us online putting out a whole bunch of consistent content about the things that are important to them. So when they do think of a financial advisor, it's almost like this thing that's just been in their ear and they think of us.
Yeah, I love that. So talk to me about the scheduling and how you already had this freedom in mind as you're preferred concept of abundance, right? Is just that time freedom. So how did you make this work together with creating 2 additional shows?
I saved time that was being wasted before. When I started working with Thomas, he kind of asked about how financial advisors typically bring in clients. And I said, you meet someone for a coffee, and then after coffee, if they're interested in possibly becoming a client, you have them in and you do an introductory meeting where you take notes about their finances, and then you send them a recap email or a call, and you ask if they want to be a client of your firm, and then they decide to become a client. He said, well, hold on, like how long does that initial process take? I was like, 2 to 3 hours of your time. And he said, well, how many times are you doing this a year? And my answer was, well, as many times as people want to grab coffee with me, right? So 50 to 100 hours a year you're spending trying to get people to become clients of yours for free. And his model, and most business owners' model, period, when you're not in a service-based business, are we have a product, you want this product, you come to my store or to my site when you're ready to buy the product, and that's when our relationship begins. So taking that into the financial services world, it meant structuring the podcast in a way where anything that somebody would want to know about us over coffee or in an introductory meeting, they find out on the podcast. So now I do not do coffee. I used to, if you looked at my tax return, the number of meals and coffee and tea meetings that I would deduct on my taxes was infinite. I think that I might have had coffee 3 times last year with somebody who wasn't already a client. I mean, truly, in 12 months. I do not do introductory meetings for free where you're like asking about our services. We've structured it so that from the podcast and from the form that you complete to get a meeting, you know everything about our services. When we meet, we're talking about whether you are or are not going to be a client. So literally just taking that out of my schedule gave me the bandwidth to start the podcast and record it consistently.
Well, and I think many service-based businesses can implement something from what you just said to really trim down either the time from initial prospect until signed deal, or our time as business owners, like you said, like having coffee and meeting people. And what's going on in my head is like, God, that's a lot of coffee. Like, do we really need to be drinking that much caffeine? So that's a piece of the health. You're going out to eat. It's your time. It's money. And to be able to shift that time and those funds into a more structured way of informing initial prospects, potential clients, of how we work together. So I would encourage people to just take notes there and kind of brainstorm how you could shift.
And even transparency of fees. It used to be, and I don't think it's just me, you're kind of nervous that if you tell people what your fees are too early in the conversation, that you'll end up not doing business with somebody who would have done business with you. No, you won't. Like, unless you were planning to reduce your fee, at some point they're going to ask it, and they were either going to do business with you or not do business with you if that fee was too high or too low. So you can't get on my calendar until you have at least acknowledged what our fees are, because to the point of people not in this industry, why would you meet with someone about whether or not you can do business before they know what you charge for business? You're wasting an hour of their time and your time. It doesn't mean that if they accept and acknowledge the fees that they have to become a client. It's just making you aware, hey, before we sit down together, you should know that our minimum fee for individuals is $5,000. If that's a problem, it doesn't hurt our feelings. Here's a list of other professionals that you can reach out to as well. But we don't need to have a conversation without at least being on the same terms of like what that minimum fee is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. The price transparency, I think, is huge. And I would encourage everybody to just kind of think about like how you purchase. When you find a product or a service that you're interested in, I'm immediately looking for pricing, looking for what's included in the package. I'm going to follow them on social media. I am reading a few blog posts. I'm listening to a podcast. Like, I'm trying to get to know them to see, hey, is this a good fit? Like, I'm doing my own vetting process before I commit a couple $1,000s to whatever the thing is that I want. And so if those things aren't on your website, but that's how you purchase, then we need to, rewind and do some edits to the site. Right?
Yeah, you wouldn't go on Grubhub or go to some like website for food and just throw a bunch of stuff in the cart if there were no price listed. You'd be pretty annoyed if by the time you got to checkout, you're like, what do you mean that like burger and fries is $30, right? It's a burger and fries. So just saying it on the front end, there's some people who don't mind paying $30 for a burger and fries, but there's a ton of people who mind not finding out that price until they get to the checkout.
Yes, absolutely. So share with me a little bit about your own personal development as you've gone from working, what was it, like 14 hours a day, I would say, combined with your daytime and then the after hours emailing in front of the TV time. And that shift, right, to boundaries with your schedule, to learning the difference between marketing and prospecting and shifting more into this intentional marketing piece, and then even putting more boundaries around your time as far as how people come into your business. So I know there's a lot inside that goes on behind the scenes there. Talk to me about you and your personal development.
So I primarily serve minority, first and second generation high income earners. And that is a group of people who typically have not had access to a financial advisor. It's very community oriented in the sense that you're working with people who know you or know your parents or know just anybody around you. And there is a feeling of obligation to that type of community that, like a lot of business owners feel to their client base, or even employees feel to their, employers, whatever the case may be. People are familiar with the idea of like feeling like you're letting someone down if you kind of change the amount of availability or access that they have to you. And before making the shift, I think that a big part of it was feeling like I might be abandoning them, or feeling like I might be seen as too good for them, or, who do you think you are for telling people, no, you can't have my personal email address. This is the channel that we've chosen for you to reach out to me for business reasons. And there's still a little bit of that that's hard to articulate or say without feeling guilty when someone asks, oh, what's your cell phone? I don't give out my cell phone. What's your personal email address? If you're reaching out for business purposes, here's the link that you can use for business purposes. We do not give out our email address to people who are not clients. Those types of things feel really awkward when you first do it. They still feel a little awkward, but less awkward now. But what you realize the more and more you do it is that a lot of things that people would make you treat as an emergency are not emergencies. So if someone, sends you an email and you've set the expectation with them that you're going to reply to them by the end of the business day, then that's the expectation. When in reality, if they sent it to you on Monday, replying to it on Wednesday would have been just as fine. Now, obviously there's a line, but there's pressures that we put on ourselves for what will happen if we put those boundaries up. And I have just come to realize that the more I strip them away, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal to tell someone I don't give out my email address. It's also not that big of a deal to see a networking event at 7:00 and decide I can market in a way that will draw in 10 times as many people that will be at that networking event. And do I need to go to some of them every once in a while? Sure. But if I put out content consistently, if I market it in the right way, you're going to reach more people than you can one-to-one. So the combination of all of those factors, once you start to see the results of it, will make you lean in harder to it and just make those barriers even more enforced.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of the concept that a lot of times your actions and the results that you get justify your belief in the first place, which was why you put those actions in place anyways.
Yeah.
So it's this circle of, justification, belief, action, justification, belief, action. So talk to me about when you started to see traction. And I do want you to mention both of your podcasts here, please, and how you've handled, because a lot of people will look at their download numbers and they'll say less people than what I wanted are listening. And that seems discouraging. So again, with that justification and belief, and talk to me about that process. How did you lean in, and at what point did you feel justified in this fresh approach?
I agree that people shouldn't focus on the download numbers, but I'm actually going to give you some, to me, relatively low ones for perspective. So on a typical day, we get 15 to 40, like in that range. It's always like 15 to 40 downloads on a day where we haven't released an episode. Yet this has still completely transformed my business. So it doesn't take hundreds of downloads a day, 15 to 40 a day. And we built up to that, right? For the first 6 to 9 months, it was like 2 to 4 a day. And we were still starting to see some good signs. What those signs were ideal customers who had found the podcast and started listening to it consistently. It's not about having 1,000 people who are not your ideal customers downloading your podcast every day. It's about, are you reaching the people who are your ideal customers with the right content? And if that's the initial thing that you can prove, then it's just about, how do I get more of my ideal client to listen? And it still doesn't have to be 1,000. So if I can say that on average, you take that 15 to 40, let's just kind of split the difference and say 24 people, right? 25 people. If 25 of my ideal customers a day are listening to me give step-by-step instructions about our services and products, that is a tremendous win. And as that builds, people will start to say stuff. I met him a few months ago. He started following us, subscribed to the newsletter. We hadn't exchanged information, anything more than just saw him at a conference, met, realized we had, mutual friends and both lived in Nashville. And I hadn't seen the person since. When I talked to him last week, he said, I have pretty much stopped listening to all other financial podcasts but yours. And I have been sending it to my friends and family members to tell them specific episodes that I want them to listen to. This is a person in my ideal audience who saw the content once, the drip, drip, drip of repurposing it several different ways caught his eye. He went back and listened to the episodes that we'd released before he found out about it, and now he's sending it to other people. That alone is all you need to sustain a business.
Absolutely. Well, and then talk to me about how specifically you have named your show and really been thoughtful about targeting your ideal client and that shared passion there, and why it's taking off in that way.
Yeah, so I tell people, so the name of our primary podcast, our general finance podcast, is the New Money, New Problems podcast. And we could have done Harrison Financial Services podcast or anything that, no disrespect to anybody else's podcast, but there's nothing about that arrests the listener, right? You want something that speaks to your listener immediately. And again, the people that we serve are first generation or second generation high income earners. They are people with new money who are confronting new problems.
Yeah.
That name turns off as many people as it attracts, but it turns off people who don't have new money and new problems, and it attracts people that do. So the name doesn't need to be generic. Even the name has to speak to your target audience. We have a second podcast, which isn't connected to my work as a financial advisor, where we consult on federal and private student loan debt. And we could have done the federal and private student loan debt podcast, but instead we called it the Escape Student Loan Debt podcast, because that's how people feel. They want to escape this burden that they feel shackled by. So the name speaks to the audience. The episodes that we release are based on the calendar of events that happen in those people's lives each year. During tax months, we talk about tax planning. During employee benefits months, we talk about employee benefits. When it's time for kids to go back to school, we talk about private school choice and college education planning. So everything has to be very intentional, so that you're not just putting out an episode, you're not just picking a name, you're not just picking artwork. It has to be something that has some thought in mind to your end user, and will this appeal to them as opposed to just appealing to broader society. If you want to appeal to broader society, now you're trying to be a podcaster as opposed to trying to use a podcast to generate business for yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for outlining that. And I immediately cued into the name right away, because I thought, well, yeah, when you suddenly, you're the first one who went to college, you're the first one with this great career, and you're the first one that makes over 6 figures a year from your new career, nobody in your family can help you. And you almost feel bad coming to them with questions about what to do with all your money. It's like you feel like you're bragging or something, and you're not. You're just like, literally, I don't know how to do this. Nobody taught me. What do I do?
Another quote that, again, stuff sticks with me. Another quote, my mentor said, you will reach the point one day where your biggest problems are things that your friends would kill to be dealing with. So think about trying to have a conversation, because we have to talk about the things that are going on in our life, even financial. But you're right. If you're trying to figure out, I just don't know what to do with this bonus money that I got, and you're talking to a family member who is truly scraping by the skin of their teeth, you not only can you not talk to them, it would offend them if you talk to them about it.
Yeah. And then it becomes this awkward thing. Well, then what can I talk about? Or I'm going to park my car around the corner because I know they've wanted a new car and I got one. And so, it's just, it becomes awkward. So you immediately need to seek out that new network of other high income earners or of other first gen, people in your same boat that you can share these problems with, that you can problem solve together. So yeah, I love what you did there. And I immediately saw it and I was like, oh, damn, that's good. So, well, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so, so much. Talk to us really quickly about where we can find you and how to connect, because you got some great stuff going on.
Thank you. So we are everything New Money, New Problems. We are the New Money, New Problems podcast. Our website is newmoneynewproblems.com. On YouTube, we're New Money, New Problems. So anything, if you just type in New Money, New Problems, we have hopefully structured it in a way where you can see all the different ways that you can find us by just typing that in. And then our other podcast, which again is a different industry, is Escape Student Loan Debt on all platforms as well. So podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, Instagram, same handles across the board.
Excellent. And all the links will be in the show notes. So thank you so much, Brenton. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.